Anti-Mage and Isekai LitRPG Adventure, Ends of Magic Book 1. Audiobook by Kevin Chapter 30 Warp Developments. Nathan studied the spectacle that was the top of the Ascendant Academy. From this vantage point, it was a shifting wonderland of color that lit the stone towers in beautiful hues. The magic wasn't enough to keep him totally hidden if he tried to run between the towers, so he scanned the rooftops below for those who might see him. Between all of the towers and windows, there were an enormous number of places for a watcher to be hiding. He was less worried about people. Between the late hour, the magical display and his stealth skills, no mage would see him. But the golems of the academy were at least immune to noticeability, though Nathan thought disguise and mage infiltration still had some effect on them. After a few minutes, he caught sight of statues inside hidden alcoves on the central tower. They looked to be about the same size as the golems that patrolled the academy, with a more feminine body shape. Each was armed with a giant metallic bow. They looked a bit like some statues of Artemis Nathan had seen on Earth. Alertness 8 achieved. I wonder if they shoot magical or physical arrows. Doesn't really matter since the real danger is an alarm of some kind. I don't think I can fly to the center tower without being spotted. He frowned, gauging the sight lines. There were enough beams of magical light around that he'd be able to cross from one tower to another so long as he was careful. It was a risk, but so was traveling through the academy. Flying would be a lot faster too. Once he thought he had the path figured out, Nathan took off, zipping through the air with his stealth and movement skills active. He followed the path he'd mapped out, though he had to make a last-second adjustment when one of the intervening streamers of magical light shifted its position. He made it to the top of the next tower without any obvious reaction from the golem archers, crouching among the tiles while deciding how to enter. He positioned himself where the bedroom should be if this tower was rotationally symmetric with the others, then bored straight down. Unfortunately, there was another protection spell woven into the stone. This one seemed to be made of fire and earth mana that maintained a layer of searing hot magma inside the walls. There was a subtler detection network behind it, paired with a cooling enchantment to prevent the defenses from turning the suite into an oven. Nathan sighed as he examined the protections with his magical senses. These archmages were paranoid, but he couldn't really fault them. He was trying to murder them all. The detection spell would not only detect anybody trying to teleport or otherwise bypass the molten stone, but it would also set off an alarm if the heat was interrupted in any way. Nathan modeled a few different ways of getting through the barriers before he figured out how to short-circuit the heat-sensing portion of the enchantment to always report the correct temperature. Wizard's Meditation 4 achieved. He hotwired the detection spell and used his aura to rapidly cool a portion of the magma, sucking the magical heat out of the spell to replenish the stamina he'd spent running between the towers. Then he bored a peephole through the wall to look into the suite beyond. As hoped, he'd breached the master bedroom, but it was empty, which was a surprise at this late hour. The room wasn't luxurious, with a cleanly made bed and severe dresses on individual racks. A few sheaves of notes were scattered on almost every flat surface, interspersed with books open to specific pages. Nathan dropped into the room and landed gently on the carpet. He needed to stay here for a couple of minutes to stabilize his entry point until the academy sealed the hole, or else he'd risk molten rock dripping down into the room. It was a balancing act to use his anti-magic to hold back the molten stone without inhibiting the wizardry that repaired the ceiling, but he managed it. Once the ceiling was repaired, he started prowling around the suite, checking for inhabitants. The library was absolutely overstuffed with old tomes. He tiptoed through the narrow corridors between stacked books but saw nobody in the cramped space. But he sensed a large mana pool through the wall. He poked a peephole next to the door, seeing that the dining room had been converted into a workshop. Schematics of human anatomy had been affixed to the wall haphazardly, and multiple workbenches were covered in stone arms and legs. In the center of a room was an armature, supporting a partially constructed human-sized golem. It was missing one leg and both arms. Unlike most giant's rest golems, this one was threaded with wizardry in addition to mana. A somewhat older woman in a plain dress sat at a desk off to the side, surrounded by notes as she pored over a detached arm. Her hair was brown with streaks of gray and cascaded messily around her shoulders. The apparent archmage sighed and leaned back to run her fingers through her hair before grabbing a steaming mug and downing the contents. The empty mug made a thunk as it hit the desk, and an older man Nathan hadn't seen stepped in from the corner of the room to refill it with a carafe. He was dressed in a fancy outfit that looked something like a tuxedo, though with billowing sleeves and a stylish metal collar imbued with mind magic instead of a tie. Nathan made the hole slightly larger, watching the enslaved butler as he returned to the corner of the room. The man was a problem since he'd be a witness if Nathan attacked the archmage while she worked. Well, I could free him or kill him. It looks like he's got a privileged position. He might be loyal to Giant's Rest even without the magic. I could try and distract him, then hide her body on the roof again. It's riskier with a manservant that he'll notice she's nowhere to be found. Maybe I'll sabotage her enchantment, cause it to blow up in her face. No, that's not much less suspicious and risks the archmage surviving. She's got tough mage armor. He decided to wait at least a few minutes to see if anything would give him an opening. If more than a half hour went by, he'd act, probably by freeing the man and then potentially locking him in the kitchen if he seemed ready to sound an alarm, only killing him if absolutely necessary. Nathan didn't want to have to kill a slave, but like the slave soldiers, he'd do it if he was forced. The woman twirled on, hunched over her golem arm and occasionally swearing as she worked. Her mug was refilled twice, but the carafe didn't seem close to running dry. Eventually she yawned, right as Nathan was about to bust into the room. The man spoke up. Mistress Shua, the founder, has scheduled a meeting of the Ascendant Council early tomorrow morning. The woman waved her hand dismissively. Badad's plans won't accomplish anything. Even if it is a strange new talent from Gemor, it's wasted mana. The golems of the academy will protect us as they always have. As you say, mistress, the man said, his voice overly patient. The archmage sighed heavily at his tone and pushed herself to her feet, rubbing at her temples. Fine, I'll go to bed. The magic in this golem won't flow clean tonight. She turned towards the door into the library, cracking her back before shuffling over to the door. Nathan withdrew as the woman approached, hiding behind a bookshelf. He heard her pause, speaking in a confused voice. Milt, why is there a hole in the wall? I do not know, mistress, the enslaved man said, as confused as she. You work with the giant's own tools, perhaps a reaction to your magic. Nathan was tense and ready to act if she cast a message, or did anything else to suggest that she suspected an intruder. But the spell the archmage cast wasn't a communication spell. It was the same spell Badad had used to try to catch Nathan inside the amphitheater, imbued with only faint tendrils of wizardry. The magic wasn't as coherent as when the quester had cast the spell, but Nathan's proximity and the potency of his talent presented a separate challenge. He had his work cut out for him in guiding a clear space in the spell in the half-second before the magic engulfed him without tripping any of the detection threads. But his new skills let him thread the gap cleanly. She pushed the door open to examine the other side of the hole. Perhaps it's healing itself. Something to study tomorrow. Go check for more and then go to bed. Wake me in time for the meeting tomorrow. Yes, mistress. Good night, Milt. Nathan was faintly exasperated at himself for waiting so long and letting her notice the holes. He was on a time limit. He shouldn't be wasting time trying for perfect stealth. He'd been proud of his last 2 kills and wanted the third one to go just as cleanly. But now his pride was demanding he kill every single archmage without raising the alarm before he went for Badud. That's dumb. The quester is more important. There isn't an achievement for perfect stealth kills on all of the archmages, and I've wasted time and taken risks here by trying for it. I need to get the mage killer development, then go after Badud. If he goes down quietly, then I can resume targeting the archmages. Sooner or later, I'm going to get unlucky or waste enough time that the alarm gets raised. Then Badud gets to mobilize additional forces against me. Nathan moved quietly from his hiding place, walking on the air above the haphazard stacks of books as the archmage moved into the bedroom. The hole he'd made to enter the library had completely healed over while he'd been waiting, but he opened it up again to find the woman flopped on the bed face down, still fully clothed and already starting to snore. He walked up and drove his elbow into her back, putting his whole body behind the motion. The blow snapped her spine and drove bits of bone into her heart and lungs. It was a lethal blow, and no healing enchantments activated. Nathan quickly turned his attention to the ceiling, stepping into the air and peeling back the lava again, not waiting for the stone to fully cool before he bored into the stone above. Droplets of molten rock fell into the bedroom, scorching the carpet. Whoops! I hope the slave doesn't notice the smoke. Magekiller has leveled to 243. You have assassinated Archmage Canny Dha Shua. Please choose a developed class from the following list to continue leveling, as you have unlocked a higher level than 243. Shrouded Infiltrator. Your path is to infiltrate enemy organizations and then attack them from within. This class will enhance your shape-changing abilities and make you immune to magical sensors. It will also make you more convincing, especially in explaining inconsistencies in your disguises. This class may further develop into making you able to integrate yourself into any group or towards manipulation of your targets. This class will let you become whoever you need to be to infiltrate the tightest security. Spellslayer. Your path is to make magic betray the ones who cast it. This class will enhance your resistance to powerful wizardry and inhibit magical communication and coordination in a broad radius around you. It will also give you more control over how your anti-magic affects spells, including sabotaging them to fail catastrophically. This class may further develop into classes aimed at detonating external magic on command or seizing it for your own use. This class will help you kill the most powerful magic users on Davrar. Killer of Mystics. Your path is to kill those who use arcane energies. This class will improve your ability to go unseen and allow you to dramatically increase your speed by spending focus. It will also reduce the effectiveness of enchanted weapons used against you. This class may further develop into ones focused on weapons or using incredible speed to kill your targets in the open. This class will allow you to fight directly against mages and their lackeys. Nathan emerged onto the roof, facing away from the center of the academy. He couldn't see the central tower from here, and the golems guarding it couldn't see him. He was on the east side of the academy, which blocked the mountains. Instead, he had an incredible view over the fields of Giant's Rest and the immense forest farther to the east. It was a stunning sight, even in the darkness. The world above lit the carpet of trees as it stretched off into the distance. Here and there were hints of ruins and other magical phenomena, from trees made of ice to towers surrounded by darting will-o-wisps. A few groves of trees stood hundreds of feet above the rest, some in the far distance even rivaling the height of the academy. Badud mentioned the woodland cults to the east. It looks like they have dungeons and cities of their own. Davrar has so much to explore. Nathan sat down on the edge of the roof, heedless of the mile-long drop underneath his feet. He was on a timer, but he could spare a few minutes to think through his new class choices. There were 3 options, which wasn't bad for a level 243 development. They were fairly distinct in theme. The first focused on blending in and social manipulation, the second focused on anti-magic, and the third was about physical combat with a side of stealth. While he'd seen how powerful infiltration was during his time here in Giant's Rest, he didn't intend to take Shrouded Infiltrator. That class would let him borrow more tools from Phelan's toolkit with shape-changing, stealth, and manipulation skills. If he had to start over with sneaking into Giant's Rest, then it would be a good class to take. But there were two problems with it. First, the class wouldn't help a lot with what was next. The mages already thought he could change shape, and he was already good at bypassing magical sensors. He was about to fight Badud, and while the choice gave him a somewhat better chance at sneaking up on the quester, it wouldn't help much in the fight that followed. If I absolutely needed to kill Badud from stealth, I might take it, but I would prefer to be able to face him in direct combat if I need to. More importantly, the class would give Nathan more social manipulation skills. As useful as such abilities might be, he didn't want them. He could see how skills like that would make him treat people like objects to be manipulated, pieces to move around a game board. Like the way Phelan operates. It would distance me from the heirs. That brought Nathan to his next class, which he was feeling the most positive about. So far his class choices had primarily focused on his anti-magic, and he didn't have a lot of complaints with that strategy. The line about being able to resist powerful works of wizardry was very appealing, because it would let him counter stuff like the reverse time, spell that Badud used as an ace in the hole. Passively inhibiting magical communication and coordination sounded generally fine, and would be especially useful tonight. That would let him engage groups of mages without worrying about somebody getting a message off. The real gem was the third promised skill. Being able to better control how magic failed sounded very useful. Spell redirection had quickly become one of his most powerful class skills, and this extended that ability. It would let him kill people from a distance with their own spells, which would mean he could do more on a battlefield since he wouldn't have to be in melee with every target. However, there was one reason that Spellslayer wasn't a snap pick. It didn't do anything to enhance his speed. He'd seen the fight between Badud and Brox. They'd moved at incredible speeds, and Killer of Mystics would let him spend focus to move faster. The other skills were good but not exceptional. One of his primary weaknesses was enchanted weapons that could cut through his enhanced body for a blow or two before they lost their magic, and a flat improvement to stealth was always useful. I've got a lot of things to spend focus on already, and while it regenerates quickly, in a fight against mages my stamina's effectively bottomless while my focus isn't. Nathan furrowed his brow, gazing across the lands below the heights of the academy. He had acceleration already, and a bunch of other mobility skills that would let him move quickly, but they wouldn't get him up to the level of the Quester's battle. At their current ranks, at least. I only need to tag him with my aura once. Then he can't fly with magic anymore, and if he tries the same barrier that stopped me last time, he's in for a nasty surprise. Both of the latter classes would help with the upcoming battle. Killer of Mystics would let him fight more like Brox and prevent Badud from dancing circles around him. But that would come at the cost of focus. The Quester almost certainly had cards up his sleeve that could kill Nathan, and he needed to keep his focus high to use Immortal Body. Though if the spells he's designed to kill me are as effective as the spell built to find me, maybe I shouldn't be concerned. Spellslayer would enhance his toughness and let him resist the biggest guns Badud had. It would also give him an unexpected weapon against any magic user. Finally, inhibiting magical communication made him more confident about reaching Badud by surprise, even if he decided to look for the control center for the academy. Blocking magical communication could be a double-edged sword in the future, but it would be manageable, and he might be able to control the skill. He chewed on the decision, looking out over the city and the forest spreading to the limits of his vision. The last factor of this decision was what class would be better after he killed the quester. He hadn't spent too much time thinking about what was next. All he had was a name and a direction, given by Brock's minutes before he'd been killed by Badud. Go to Kehona and seek out Saria Pamaris. She will direct you to more empires that should be destroyed. Maybe I really should be planning to do all of this again. He told the Antimage students that the purpose of anti-magic was to level the playing field, to let normal people stand up against archmages and ancient horrors reanimated. The ultimate expression of that was the endings. That's my next goal. If I go to Saria, it's mainly to find another quester, somebody else who has first-hand knowledge of the endings. She can point me in the right direction to stop them, or at least tell me what they are. Notably, Spellslayer didn't just say he would be able to sabotage spells. It said it would give you more control over how your anti-magic affects spells. That was a broad description, and the only thing he knew about the future is that he would run into new and strange magic. Being able to control how it failed sounded great. Nodding, he stepped forward into empty space, skydiving off the tower as he accepted his new class. Congratulations, you are now a Spellslayer. 2 of your existing class skills have developed, and you have unlocked 3 new class skills. These skills are tied to your parent class, and their power will increase with your level in that class. Davrar applauds your choice, and hopes you will continue to survive and prosper. Class skill Regenerative Focus. Your focus will rapidly regenerate when you are not very distracted. It can be spent to enhance your attention and improve your control, or on other skills or talents that utilize focus. Class skill Catastrophic Blows. You will be better able to identify the weak points of your foes, and your strikes against those areas are more likely to inflict lethal damage. Injuries inflicted with your bare hands will resist healing magic. Class skill Battle Stealth. Your movements will be harder to notice, especially in the confusion of combat. This effect can be enhanced by spending focus. Class skill Mage Infiltration. You will be able to blend into hostile environments easily, and will not seem out of place even in imperfect disguises. This skill will mimic signs of being a mage when you are disguised as one, including a fake mana pool. Class skill Forgettable. Foes will forget details about you after you leave their attention. This is a mental effect that can be resisted by someone with the appropriate skill or sufficient willpower. Class skill Unsuspecting Strike has become Sneaky Blow. Attacks against unaware targets are quieter and harder to notice. They will also more easily bypass armor and other protections. Class skill Anti-Magic Stealth. Your anti-magic hides you from magical sensors and detection, and even spells tuned to detect an absence will not detect you. Class skill Spell Redirection has become Magical Manipulation. Your anti-magic can manipulate mana and wizardry in both spells and enchantments, will not enhance your ability to otherwise modify spells. Class skill Lethal Index. You will be able to assess if injuries you cause are lethal, and how long your foes will survive them. New class skill Wizard Resistance. Your inherent anti-magic will protect you from wizardry. The more powerful the spell in question, the more effective the resistance. New class skill Magic Jammer. Communication, coordination, and information gathering spells will fail around you, even without direct contact with your anti-magic. New class skill Controlled Failure. You can control the effect of your anti-magic on spells, ranging from only disabling a portion of a spell to causing the entire structure to fail catastrophically. Spellslayer is now level 260. As he fell, Nathan glanced over the new skills, satisfied by their effects. They were about what he'd expected, though the additional skill developments were always a wild card. Now his sneak attacks were stealthier, and his magical manipulation explicitly worked on enchantments. It had kind of already done that, but the new skill would almost certainly enhance what he could do when screwing around with enchantments. Oh right, I can spend focus on battle stealth. I'd frankly forgotten about that. Probably won't do it too often. He stopped himself at the place where the tower merged with the body of the academy. He was standing on thin air right next to the shell of high-pressure wizardry that wrapped around the entire tower. His new skill would probably protect him from the crushing gravity of the barrier, but the high-pressure air was still dangerous. Nathan glanced through a window, seeing an empty room with rows of tables that looked like lab benches. He melted his way through the wizardry-conjured glass, making his way inside the academy once again. Chapter 31, The Skull of a Giant. It was easy to know where to go. All of the wizardry around Nathan subtly pointed the way towards his destination. Using Mental Fortress to triangulate, he pinpointed the theoretical control center right underneath where the central tower joined the bulk of the academy. He beelined towards it, moving carefully through the body of the giant structure. There were more patrols the closer he got, but it wasn't hard to avoid them with his senses and ability to walk through walls. The biggest limitation was trying not to leave obvious holes the patrols could find before they sealed up behind him. I can probably fight a patrol without an alert getting out. I kind of want to test out my new class skills. Regardless of the temptation, Nathan stayed quiet and moved cautiously inwards. He had a few hours left, and this was the final stretch. His new class skills didn't make him faster at tunneling through the walls of the academy, but he was still getting faster with practice. His plan was to check out the locus of wizardry in the academy, then decide what to do next. If it seemed important, he might mess with it. If it didn't, he'd go up the central tower and find Badud. Nathan was just so curious what he'd find where all the wizardry converged. It could be a power source, a control center, some kind of routing node, or something else he wasn't expecting. He was hoping that if he destroyed whatever it was, that would be the end of the Ascendant Academy. Maybe it was a power source, and the academy would become uninhabitable as doors stopped opening. Maybe it was the security center, and it would shut down all the golems and tracking spells, making the academy vulnerable to attack from people without anti-magic. In any of those cases, it was a priority target. Making the academy uninhabitable was probably a higher priority than killing Badud. It wouldn't be as dramatic of a confrontation, but it would be a larger and longer-lasting blow to Giant's Rest than the death of a founder, especially since I've got a suspicion that the questers don't really die. It's definitely a setback, but Brox didn't talk like dying was his end, especially given his stories of so many thousands of years of combat. I don't think I saw the death of a legend, just the end of a chapter, a temporary loss. While he thought, Nathan crossed most of the remaining distance to the inner chamber. He was inside of a disused classroom that looked disconcertingly like an operating theater, but his magical senses told him the next wall over was special. It was thicker than usual, and the wizardry that flowed through the stone felt especially dense. Drilling into the wall, it soon became clear that there was only a thin layer of rock over a layer of shining metal several feet thick. But the metal was still conjured from wizardry, and it yielded to his aura. The chamber beyond was a huge void in the center of the academy, spherical and as large as the low-tier residence hall. In the center of the space floated an oblong orb made of stone that was the size of a small building. The only physical connection to the rest of the academy was a spiraling staircase that stretched from the top of the chamber to the top of the orb, making it look like a Christmas ornament hanging by a slender spiral thread. The effect was only enhanced by the streams of mana that emerged from the walls and crossed the space to the central object. They were dense enough to see with the naked eye, and carried visibly pulsing power across the emptiness. In addition to the overwhelming power of normal mana, hundreds of threads of wizardry were woven through the room. The network of magic was all focused around the stone egg, like it was the spider at the center of a vast web the size of the entire academy. The interior surface of the room was shiny metal, and the light emitted by the mana and the wizardry alike lit the space in a rainbow of slowly moving colors that made it seem like it was underwater. This looks important, but it's probably not the Academy's power source. Not with the energy flowing in instead of out. What is it instead? How strong are the defenses? Nathan took a deep breath and looked around the chamber carefully, checking for anybody or anything that would see him cross the hundreds of feet to the central egg-shaped ball of stone. There was nothing in his line of sight, but the orb blocked a good portion of his view. That included the top of the egg where the staircase connected. That was the most likely place for any guards. The room's walls were shiny enough for him to look around until he found a reflection of the spot where the staircase connected. The image was distorted and partially obscured by a glowing river of ice mana, but the colorful robes of several mages on guard were clear enough, as was the fact that the staircase continued downwards into the suspended orb of stone. There were also vague shapes that were probably at least one or two additional golems. They probably wouldn't be able to see him if he moved out of their line of sight, unless they were specifically looking in the right spot and saw his reflected movement. His gray robes just didn't stand out much among the chaotic mess of light for the reflection to draw attention. There's gotta be more security. The wall was tough, but it wasn't invincible. If this is all there is to it, somebody could get across with a fly spell. Maybe it's just not that important. Nathan turned his attention forward, feeling outwards with his magical senses. Sure enough, there were layers of wizardry and mana wrapping around the whole room, hidden behind the overt display of magic. He closed his eyes and shaped his senses like a spike, trying to reach across the hundreds of feet toward the stone shell that was his target. His senses couldn't reach that far, but Nathan burned focus and tried to treat his awareness like an aura, using his mental skills to enhance the effect. There was a moment where he felt the skill adapt, and it allowed him to expand the bubble of awareness in his projected direction just like it was another aura. Congratulations, you have developed the Wizard Senses utility skill into Wizard's Detection. Utility skill, Wizard's Detection. This skill lets you sense the mana and wizardry around you and understand its purpose. You may expand and direct the reach of this sense by spending focus. Guiding the development of a skill to use a suitable resource seems like a pretty easy and broadly applicable insight. Useful, though I don't really need yet another demand on my focus. With his new skill, Nathan quickly built up a picture of the barrier that protected the stone orb while allowing mana and wizardry through. It was a multifaceted defense, a clever construction of subtle wizardry that blended into the flows of magic around it while making the open space hostile to any intruders. First was a spatial distortion that dramatically increased the distance, a bit like how Badud's slow shell had worked. While the gap looked like a few hundred feet, Nathan could tell that any physical objects would need to cross nearly a half-mile of distance to approach the center of the chamber. Second was a lack of air. A filter seemed to exclude any kind of gas from the center of the chamber. It wasn't a firm line, but rather a pressure gradient that ensured the central orb hung in a large pocket of near vacuum, with an exception around the staircase. The third was a ramping disintegration effect that lay tucked inside the low-pressure zone. It felt aggressive, strong enough to rip apart gas molecules into their molecular components. So to sum it up, there's a spatially expanded barrier of vacuum that actively tries to dissolve you on a molecular level. It lets magical energy through just fine, but anything physical will boil and disintegrate as it tries to cross a half-mile of distance that's less friendly than interplanetary space. Nathan considered abandoning this objective and just going after Badud, but the enhanced security just made him more certain that he should investigate the chamber. He didn't know what was inside, but it was looking more and more like a general control room for the Ascendant Academy, or a vault of incredible treasures that he wouldn't be able to use. The question was whether to break through the wizardry in front of him, or to maneuver to the top of the chamber and descend the staircase and fight the guards. Either would probably work, though there's a good chance they see me coming if I come down the staircase. Let's try to punch through this barrier. I can probably avoid tripping any alarms, and I can always back off and try the other approach. He spent a minute thinking through the challenge in front of him and how to deal with it. He could probably negate most of the spatial expansion effect and ignore the disintegration. The biggest problem was the lack of air, not because it would hurt him, but because it would make airwalking less effective. The talent said it would use stamina to push off of air. He didn't expect that to work in a vacuum. So he'd need to bring some air in with him and build up enough speed to travel across the relevant distance. Nathan stepped away from the wall, approaching the edge of the pressure gradient. He extended his antimagic to disrupt the barrier and allow air to flow in ahead of him. A gentle breeze started up, and the space shimmered as the inrushing air encountered the disintegration effect. Whoops! Hope the guards don't notice that. At least it's fairly subtle compared to the magical light show. Without delay, Nathan sprinted forward, burning stamina as fast as he could to move as quickly as possible. As he got closer, he expanded his antimagic outwards, expanding the disruption of the magic that created the vacuum. More air rushed forward, giving Nathan a tailwind. Acceleration 5 achieved. The disintegration effect tried to latch onto him, but failed to even touch his robes through the 2-class skills that countered wizardry. The spatial expansion was harder to beat because it worked on a grander scale, but Nathan sent out tendrils of antimagic to neutralize it in the local area. The air around him was thinning out, but as he disrupted the spatial expansion, it compressed down again. He kept running, spending a thread of focus on noticeability to push the guard's attention away from his little part of the huge room. He was more than halfway across the gap when the air thinned again, all of the gas he'd brought with him diffusing into the huge area. He took a few more steps on the dissipating surface, each one harder than the last as his talent grew weaker. Airwalking 6 achieved. Then the air was entirely gone, and Nathan soared forward. He let the air inside his lungs escape, not wanting to try to test if his enhanced body could resist exploding from the pressure differential. The vacuum pulled at his eyes and ears, but his inherent toughness and regeneration made any damage a non-issue. Gravity was still present, and Nathan threw all of his efforts into countering the space-expanding wizardry. Otherwise, he'd just fall back to the bottom of the huge chamber without even coming close to the orb. He reached out to the magic that enforced the spatial expansion and realized he had more options than just breaking the magic. By staging his destruction of the wizardry, he could choose where the material within the spatial effect ended up in the final space. He ripped apart the wizardry ahead of him first before working backwards. The directed contraction hurled him forwards, and he stretched out his aura to make handholds in the smooth stone ahead. I think that was controlled failure being useful. Wizard's Meditation 5 achieved. Nathan slammed into the surface of the egg, managing to grab onto the new divots and halt his movement. He extended his antimagic forward, intending to burrow into the structure to get inside. A few feet in there was a rough white surface that resisted his antimagic. Redoubling his effort got him nowhere, and Nathan poked the surface with annoyance. It almost looked like yellowed bone and wasn't made of wizardry at all. He elbowed it as hard as he could, hoping to break through. His strike didn't leave a mark, and Nathan sighed. He'd have to work his way around the outside of the orb to the entrance on the top. At least this way the guards wouldn't see him coming. But he would have to hold his breath as he clambered across the outside of the stone. At least I know I can replace oxygen with stamina from the whole fire elemental thing. Not a good exchange rate, but there's enough mana around here that I won't run out. It was a very uncomfortable few minutes of climbing, but at least he could make his own handholds. A detection spell washed across the chamber, but it wasn't enhanced by wizardry. There was no chance it detected him. It still indicated that the guards were suspicious of something, so Nathan redoubled his speed. He came up the side of the floating orb, trying to stay low and hidden. The slope became shallower until he could stand, albeit on a steep angle. He surveyed the top of the orb where the staircase connected. It was a flat area about 30 feet across that was demarcated by a spindly guardrail. A table in the center looked to have some kind of card game spread across it. The game was abandoned, with all 4 mages standing on the edges of the area, looking around. There were 3 enforcement mages and 1 war mage, all men. Something had alarmed them, probably the effects of Nathan messing with the vacuum or spatial enchantments. They looked more like people puzzling over a computer glitch than guards looking for an intruder. Behind them, the staircase connected to a landing on top of the orb, then continued down into the secured structure. 2 golems stood on the landing, watching the top of the stairs attentively. One of the mages seemed to be trying to cast a message spell over and over, growing more and more confused as it failed. He looked up with worry in his eyes, saying something that Nathan couldn't hear because he was still in vacuum. If they've noticed that magical communication spells don't work, then I don't have much time. One of them will probably go up the stairs until they get out of my radius. The war mage who had been looking in Nathan's direction suddenly turned around, seemingly annoyed with the man who'd been trying to cast message. He raised his hands angrily, shouting at the other man. Nathan took the opportunity. He spent focus to direct attention away from himself and zipped forward, staying low. He felt a burning sensation in his muscles at this final bit of exertion, but directed stamina to keep him going. High-tier noticeability 9 achieved. One of the enforcement mages caught sight of him at the last moment, pointing and yelling. The war mage was just starting to turn when Nathan vaulted over the guardrail and dropped him with an elbow to the side of the head. Spellslayer has leveled to 266. You have slain Brahm Dho Shakin, a war mage guard of the Ascendant Academy. Nathan drew in a breath of sweet air and headed towards the mages, extending his mana towards the golems as they finally looked down. They both attacked with laser eye-beams, which did absolutely nothing against Nathan. He noticed that their communication with the broader academy had also been cut off as he approached. One of the golems moved to intercept Nathan as he bounded towards the next enforcement mage, but he juked wide before cutting inside the golem's movement. It overshot, and Nathan kicked the mage over the guardrail. The man's scream cut off as he crossed out of the safe zone and into vacuum, and Nathan saw the man start to dissolve in the disintegration field. Parkour 3 achieved. Spellslayer has leveled to 270. You have slain Jirir Dho Chun, an enforcement mage guard of the Ascendant Academy, with his own security measures. He danced away from the golem as it chased him, dodging a kick that made the air whistle and a punch that shattered the floor to reveal white bone beneath. The giant stone statue was hurting him towards its compatriot with the blows, but Nathan could feel the wizardry of the second golem behind him, and knew when it was about to attack without looking. Wizard's Detection 2 achieved. As it lunged for him, he dropped, kissing the ground as the stone statue passed overhead. It fouled the motions of the second golem for an instant, letting Nathan close in on the third mage, who had darted for the opening that led into the orb. Effortless Dodge 4 achieved. The fourth mage had backed up to the guardrail farthest from Nathan, and he finally succeeded in casting a spell with shaking fingers. Fly, the enforcement mage, took to the air, trying to fly up the staircase. But Nathan's aura slashed through the spell, disrupting it in just the wrong way to send the man veering off course and right into the lethal security field. Spellslayer has leveled to 275. You have slain AudioBook, an enforcement mage guard of the Ascendant Academy, with his own security measures. The last mage was taking the steps downwards 3 at a time, frantically pulling something from a pocket as he approached the double doors at the bottom of the stairwell. Nathan grabbed the neck of his robe and pulled him up into a descending elbow, cracking the mage's skull like an egg before dropping him to the floor in front of the door. Spellslayer has leveled to 281. You have slain AudioBook, an enforcement mage guard of the Ascendant Academy. Then the golems dropped down into the enclosed area. Their reach covered the entire space, and they immediately set about battering him into paste. Nathan spent a few seconds frantically dodging and blocking in the cramped space. His anti-magic was draining their fuel tanks quickly, his new talents and skills making the strategy more effective than it had been against the last golem Nathan had fought. He bounced off the floor, the walls, even caught some redirected momentum from one golem's swing to dodge the other. Parkour 4 achieved, but they were fast and persistent. The two golems weren't perfectly coordinated, but they were able to box him in and prevent him from escaping the stairwell. He had to block a solid blow with crossed arms that sent his back cracking against the wall, unable to react as the second golem's fist surged towards his face. There was a rushing sense of pain, then intense disorientation. He was on the floor, looking up at the two golems as they stood over him. Neither of them were looking down, and one seemed to be querying the wizardry of the academy over and over again. Immortal Body 2 achieved. Nathan stayed on the ground, playing dead as his anti-magic continued its work. It only took another couple of seconds before both golems collapsed like puppets with cut strings. He staggered to his feet before severing the magical connections of both giant stone statues to complete their destruction. Arcane Nullfield 3 achieved. Spellslayer has leveled to 299. You have destroyed 2 irreplaceable giant golems of the Ascendant Academy. He looked back at the wall where he'd been punched. The stone was cratered and bloody, with fragments of bone and gray matter stuck into the wall. Nathan shuddered, reaching out a hand to touch the material of his own brain. Let's not do that very often. He took a deep breath and intentionally turned his attention to the door. It was a bit of a puzzle. The slab of metal wasn't a standard wizardry lock like the ones he'd seen everywhere in the academy, and a prod revealed that it wasn't susceptible to anti-magic. The construction seemed to follow a fundamentally different architecture, including the fact that it was an actual door made of some kind of reddish metal, with no visible handle or lock. The thing seemed grafted onto the academy, like it had been done later by a different hand. He noticed it wasn't connected to the wizardry of the broader academy in any way, like it's an air-gapped security measure. It's interesting they didn't want to lock the control room of the academy with the magic of the academy. Speaks to a distrust of the academy's wizardry. I bet the material is adamantium or something. Nathan puzzled over the magic for a moment, noting that the door contained a powerful teleport-locking enchantment. But the authentication magic was completely new to him, and looked like it would take a while to figure out. He shrugged and reached down for the body of the mage he'd killed down here. The man had been reaching for an enchanted token, and Nathan forced his aura away from his hand before he grabbed the object and pressed it into the obvious indent. With a sound like a vault unsailing, the massive slab of red metal swung wide open. Chapter 32. The core of a dungeon inside the heavily defended stone orb was a large magical control room. Half a dozen mages inspected illusory panels like technicians monitoring a nuclear power plant. The displays didn't make much sense to Nathan, but it looked like they were controlling the wizardry that ran the academy. Oh yeah, this looks like a jackpot. An artisan mage, a war mage and a strongly built archmage were clustered around one of the control panels, talking in worried voices as they discussed whatever it showed. The war mage cast an idle look towards the door as it swung open, then did a double take as Nathan pushed the heavy slab of metal shut behind him to seal the room. The lock re-engaged with a quiet hiss just before the red-robed woman raised her voice in a shrill yell. Assassin! All eyes turned towards Nathan and dangerous magic kindled in every mage's hands. But they were trapped with him in an enclosed space, and there were no golems to get in the way. Nathan went straight for the archmage, sending lashes of aura to break the spells being cast in his direction. A lightning bolt exploded in the war mage's hands, and she fell in a smoking mess as Nathan's anti-magic tore away the containment portion of the spell, and the magic grounded itself through her body. More spells went awry around the room with pops and explosions. The artisan mage tried to cast message, but it warbled away in his hand even without Nathan's interference. The archmage didn't try to flee, instead quickly snapping off a pair of self-buffing spells and hurling himself at Nathan. A blade extended from a bracelet, crackling with dark power as a full-body suit of armor tried to expand over his body from a belt. A concentrated wave of anti-magic interfered with the summoning process, and the man's armor stuttered as it slithered up his chest. His blade flickered, drooping flacidly. The armor seized up, causing the archmage to stumble forward off balance. Nathan met him with a knee to the temple, snapping back the archmage's head with the crunch of broken bone. He laid into the rest of the mages before their leader's body even hit the ground. They didn't stand a chance. With his rage active, he was significantly faster and stronger than they were, and could break every spell as they cast it. Mages of Giant's Rest didn't usually train in melee fighting, and soon enough, he stood over 6 bodies in a blood-stained control room. He panted for a second, enjoying the thrill of the one-sided fight. Then he closed his eyes and calmed his breath, suppressing his rage before wiping bloody knuckles on the robes of his last victim. Spellslayer has leveled to 331. You have killed Archmage Siko's Dho Fedras, as well as the mages Nair Dho Den, Wifni Dha Shiz, Mua Dha Nora, Pal Dho Rornez, and Wiv Dho Enher. I suppose I'm not in a safe enough area for Void of Magic to level. I'm looking forward to a pile of levels later. He'd managed to keep his anti-magic away from the underlying wizardry of the room, but many of the display panels had dissipated and were slowly reforming. Nathan shrugged, sitting down in a vacant chair and closing his eyes as he mapped out the flow of magic around him. I want to know what this place is, to figure out how to cause the most damage. The workstations and the desks were filled with complicated magic dedicated to storing and displaying information on the illusory control panels. The magic was grafted onto what lay beneath, static additions to the malleable wizardry that let the mages of Giant's Rest control the academy as a whole. Behind the control machinery was the densest, most powerful wizardry Nathan had ever felt. It was stronger than Badud's reverse time, denser than the magic that made up the very shape of the academy. This much wizardry could achieve almost anything, and Nathan focused down on a small section right underneath his feet to understand what was going on. Wizard's Detection 3 achieved. The wizardry was communicating, firing information back and forth in branching patterns at a rate and density Nathan couldn't hope to keep track of. He spent a few minutes looking for a pattern, trying to figure out the underlying system to the signals, but came up with nothing. Each impulse seemed to go to multiple sources, where it was sometimes picked up and passed on and sometimes just ignored. The pattern looked familiar, but Nathan couldn't quite put his finger on where he'd ever seen anything like it. Wait a second. With Mental Fortress, the only reason I wouldn't remember something perfectly is because it was from before I got the skill. That probably means this is reminding me of something from Earth. What was it? That was the clue he needed. This signaling reminded Nathan of slowed-down neuronal action potentials he'd seen from neuroscience presentations. A neuron would fire and the action potential would travel through the cell, reaching out to other neurons which would sometimes fire and sometimes not. Am I standing inside of a brain? It seems slow. On a hunch, he scanned a portion of the wizardry that was farther away from him, on the opposite side of the control room. The wizardry over there was in constant blurring motion, moving as fast as thought. I can only see it moving because Magic Jammer is slowing down the signals right next to me to a speed I can detect. My presence is probably giving this mind a bit of a headache. He opened his eyes and took in the control room again. At the corners in front of the room, he saw more of the white material intruding through the smooth stone. It was fluted and ridged, more organic than it had looked from the outside. This is a skull. I'm standing inside of a giant skull that's somehow still alive. The wizardry around me is the thoughts firing. Either it was always wizardry or it's been converted to wizardry, and it's running the academy. Congratulations, you have developed the Wizard Intuition utility skill into Wizard's Understanding. Utility skill. Wizard's Understanding. With this skill, you understand magic and wizardry around you. This extends to all applications of magic and wizardry, including spells, enchantments, and other effects. Nathan blew a heavy breath out of his cheeks, trying to figure out how this changed things. It felt like learning that the intellect of a dead giant was being used to run the academy at the heart of Giant's Rest should matter in some deeply important way. But it just meant the academy was intelligent and enslaved. Should I just put it out of its misery? Kill this giant's brain, let it be at peace. He frowned. That's what he'd originally intended to do, but it didn't seem right. This dungeon had originally been called the Grave of All Giants. Then a team of questers had conquered it and converted it into the Ascendant Academy. Well, what did they do to conquer it? It probably involved building this control room to enslave the intelligence that controlled the dungeon. Could I free it from slavery? That's kind of my thing. Nathan looked around the room with new fervor, focusing on the various enchantments that had been grafted onto the wizardry of the control room. The control panels connected to each other in a separate network of magic that overlaid the organic layer of wizardry. He traced that magic and saw where it sank tendrils of influence into the sorceress mind beneath. It's a mind control spell on a grand scale. If a normal mind control spell is a police station, this thing is the goddamn Pentagon. Wizard's Understanding 2 achieved. He took a deep breath and centered himself, mapping out the scope of the spell entwined with the cognition beneath. There appeared to be a single failsafe on the spell, in the form of an unassuming box tucked in the corner. If it detected that the control spell was failing, it would cast an immensely powerful disintegration spell that would vaporize everything inside the skull over the course of a few seconds. But the destructive enchantment hadn't been meant to counter somebody malicious in the control room. It was a safeguard in case the mind that ran the academy ever started to throw off the shackles placed upon it. Nathan found it simple to cut the box off from the rest of the spell. At the very least, that's a great argument for breaking the mind magic. I don't know what it will do, but I know that the founders would prefer this mind be dead instead of free. It was definitely them that cast this control magic. The spellwork is beyond anything that even an archmage of Giant's Rest could cast. Once he'd mapped out the full extent of the mind control magic, Nathan started tearing it apart. He didn't understand half of the components he was destroying, but he didn't need to. They probably included the mechanism that let the Academy whitelist people and configure the settings of the enormous building. He ripped it all out, trying his best to preserve the cognitive magic underneath. It was difficult, since the mind control spell was much more robust than the delicate wizardry they connected to, like metal probes stuck into a brain. The mental magic seemed built to limit the kinds of thought allowed even when disconnected from the whole, so he verged on the side of causing damage to burn out all traces of the control spell. I'd love to convince the dungeon to switch sides to fight for Gemor. Could I move the Antimage school here? The room quaked as Nathan continued, shuddering in a kind of anticipatory spasm. He rushed to finish, not wanting to leave the job half done. Nathan spent focus to split his attention, directing dozens of tendrils of antimagic to dismantle the spell as quickly as possible. Congratulations! You have developed the mid-tier aura manipulation, utility skill into high-tier aura manipulation. Utility skill, high-tier aura manipulation. You will find it easier to manipulate your aura, including precisely controlling the shape and density across many targets. Will not increase the size of your aura at all. The shaking only grew worse, and the stone and material around Nathan started falling apart, annihilated by destructive wizardry that pulsed out of the very thoughts surrounding him. The door clattered to the floor as its frame distorted, and Nathan zipped through the opening to get out of the collapsing room. He dodged pieces of the falling stairwell and exited the space. He paused in midair, watching as stone flaked away to expose the skull beneath. I wonder if it will be able to communicate. A voice sounded from above, furious beyond what mere words could convey. What have you done? Badad had appeared next to what was left of the stairwell near the top of the chamber, glaring down at Nathan. The older man was almost foaming at the mouth, and he kept shouting, I set you a challenge of wits and you murder like a mindless brute, then destroy a work of generations. Nathan was already sprinting upwards as fast as he could go. He'd activated his rage for the extra speed and extended his antimagic in an attempt to catch the quester while he was monologuing. The man seemed to come to his senses and lifted his hands, channeling a familiar magic between them. Reverse time, Nathan halted in his tracks, throwing out his aura to block the surging wave of wizardry that washed out from the quester. The spell was tuned differently than the last time he'd seen it used. It would cover a smaller area but rewind time farther back, potentially undoing the last few minutes. He really doesn't want the Academy to be unshackled, or maybe he's trying to bring back the Archmage I killed. Regardless, I need to stop the spell. Antimagic clashed against wizardry. The last time Nathan had faced this spell, he'd barely managed to hold onto his memories, but he'd come a long way since then. The quester's magic battered against Nathan's aura like a tidal wave smashing into a seawall. He staggered backwards, gritting his teeth and spending focus to maintain the antimagic through the strain. The magic lapped around the edges of his aura, skirting the surface of the awakening skull but not managing to reach the control room. Arcane Nullfield 4 achieved. Winds whipped through the protected space, as half of the chamber went back in time while the other half obeyed Einstein. The guardrail where Nathan had killed the war mage flickered back into place, and the body jerked upright. The suddenly resurrected man looked around in a panic, trying to figure out what had just happened. Nathan staggered in midair, feeling like he just lifted a castle with his aura. His antimagic felt strained in a new way, and he coughed in an entirely psychosomatic response. While he didn't have any physical injuries, the entire experience had left him feeling profoundly unwell. Force pull, Nathan looked up, gasping. He saw the war mage zipping up the chamber towards Badad, pulled by the spell. The quester caught the man in a single hand and shouted into his ear. Nathan strained to hear what he was saying. Evacuate the academy. Message everybody to flee. The quester hurled the mage through the hole in the ceiling with another spell, then turned back to Nathan with a snarl. His voice rumbled forth, amplified to echo furiously around the huge chamber. "Boy, you have doomed this continent to a prophecy of death. I don't even have to kill you." Badad's expression twisted into a snarl. "But I swear by Ada's upon my magic that I will see you dead for the legacy and potential you have destroyed." The quester held his hands together and began forming yet another grand spell. Nathan felt a second source of wizardry building behind and below him, and he darted a glance downwards to what had been the control room for the Ascendant Academy. The stone had flaked away to reveal a giant skull beneath. It was a bit more spherical than a normal human skull would be, and of course the size of a small building. The giant skull rotated freely, exposing eye sockets that burned with bright blue light. There was a third eye in the center of the forehead, smaller than the others. A spell grew there, bright as a mercury bulb. It felt to Nathan like a tiny dot of magic with enough power to wipe out a mountain. "I think this is one piece of magic I would do well to get out of the way of. Then it'll hit Badud." Nathan dashed to the side, doing his best to vacate the line of fire between the quester and the skull of the giant. He ended up in the zone of vacuum and started falling without any air to walk on. Right, forgot about that. Oblivion, Badud released his spell first, and a loose gray cloud swept downwards. It didn't even disintegrate what remained of the stairs. The stone just didn't exist anymore, and the air in the protected column was sucked towards the spell like it emptied into space. Then the giant skull released the incandescent orb of power, which rushed into the cloud. It slowed down and then expanded, light spilling out as the spells fought for dominance. For a moment, it seemed like they would cancel each other out entirely. But then the light was smothered as Badud's cloud continued onwards to strip away layers of bone on the giant's face. It roared in response, though Nathan couldn't hear the sound through the vacuum. "I think I should be helping the giant skull thing." Nathan sent strands of anti-magic out to rip through the supporting framework of the magic holding the air back. He wasn't worried about setting off alarms anymore, and quickly swept a huge area clear of the magics that made the chamber so hostile. The onrushing air blew him back, upwards and towards the battlefield between the quester and the liberated dungeon core. High-tier aura manipulation 2 achieved. Oblivion. Nathan rode the air and pushed harder, accelerating even faster to catch Badud's recast of the same spell. He concentrated his aura down as he punched into the grayish cloud. The wizardry tried to eat away everything, to destroy things on a conceptual level. Nathan's senses started to degrade as the magic wore away at his perception, even as his anti-magic shuddered like a tree in an earthquake. Snarling, Nathan spent focus to recenter himself and his grip on the world around him. This spell was even stronger than the first. He struggled to keep his aura concentrated as he punched a ragged hole in the center of the cloud of disintegrating magic. Badud's got to have some kind of skill or something to make his spells more robust, harder to disrupt. He's a quester. I bet he's got a dozen skills reinforcing his spells in some way. Nathan had been intending to swipe out a tendril of anti-magic and knock out Badud's flight spells, but dealing with the destructive wizardry absorbed all of his attention. Besides, the quester was being careful to stay on the edge of the chamber, juking away to keep out of range of Nathan's aura. But with Nathan taking the brunt of the quester's spell, the dungeon core was free to cast its own magic unimpeded. It roared again, the sound surprisingly high-pitched and tinny. 3 arrows of magic shot from its mouth, each one trailing explosions as they caused the air in their wake to detonate. They moved as fast as missiles seeking out their targets. To Nathan's surprise, 2 of the attacks flew at him, and he was caught off guard by the projectiles. He managed to twist aside from the first one, but the second one detonated against his aura just a few feet from his skin. The wave of concussive magic wasn't as hard to resist as Badad's spells, but the reality-bending effect still sent him flying backwards. Effortless dodge 5 achieved. The missile he dodged detonated against the edge of the vast chamber beyond Nathan, shattering the shiny metal and blasting a hole in the wall just in time for him to fly into it and become caught in the falling rubble. Dust and wreckage buried him for a moment until Nathan flared his aura to clear the obstructions and leapt to his feet. 30 feet away was the war mage that Badad had brought back to life by reversing time. He was standing in a half-destroyed hallway, gawking at the destruction, and Nathan standing in the center of it. The mage turned to flee, jetting down the hallway with a fly spell. A golem lunged out of a side hallway, hands closing roughly around the red-robed man with frantic energy. The giant statue bashed the war mage against the floor and walls viciously. The first 4 blows cracked the stone, but then the mage armor broke and the 5th blow splatted the mage across the ceiling. The golem turned to Nathan and lunged forwards. It lacked the grace of every other golem he'd fought, but more than made up for it in rapid aggression. I hoped it would be on my side, but a dungeon is a dungeon. It can't be reasoned with, it just wants to kill everybody. I freed a crazed monster. Nathan leapt backwards, buying space while he slashed out with 4 blades of anti-magic. Each of the blows targeted the golem's left leg, and it staggered as most of the magical links controlling the limb snapped. Nathan dodged around the golem, kicking off of its body to send him flying back into the giant chamber as his anti-magic struck again to prevent the crippled golem from chasing him. Parkour 5 achieved. He flew back into the huge chamber, just in time to see Badad's next spell. Ruination of Wizardry, a directional shockwave tore through space, blasting through the giant skull hovering in the center of the enormous chamber and out the other side. Shards of bone flaked off of the dungeon core, and the glowing eyes dimmed for a moment. The core of the dungeon seemed to rally against its own destruction, but then it fell into fragments. Dozens of giant chunks of bone fell hundreds of feet to punch holes in the bottom of the chamber. Then the quester turned towards Nathan, his expression furious. "Now I will kill you." Thank you for listening to the story on KevinAudio.com Chapter 33. A trial of endings. Badad's first spell was a vortex of distorted space. It flew as fast as a crossbow bolt and punched easily through a tendril of anti-magic. The feedback sent a shiver down Nathan's spine. He's not pulling any punches. It feels like he spent extra resources to make the spell harder to dispel or counter. He's probably got 2 spellcasting classes over level 729 or 2187, and all of the tricks to go with them. Better to dodge what I can. Wizard's Understanding 3 achieved. Nathan watched the spell home in unerringly on his head, then jerked aside at the last moment, spinning his whole body away from the attack. The twisting wizardry rattled his bones as it flew by, and it felt like he'd stood next to a building-sized jackhammer. The vibrations caused by disrupted space damaged his soft tissues, and Nathan coughed up bloody froth as his lungs healed from the damage. But he didn't slow his airborne sprint towards the quester. Effortless dodge 6 achieved. Behind him, the spell impacted the wall of the huge chamber, boring a 10-foot wide hole all the way through the academy to the outside. Another plume of dust shot up, and Nathan heard the sounds of crashing stone as floors and ceilings crumbled in the wake of the disruptive spell. Badad backpedaled from Nathan's charge, casting a trio of enormous fireballs that split apart and curved towards Nathan from varied angles. Then the quester glanced backwards and cast a quick disintegrate to open a hole in the wall, so Nathan didn't trap him against the stone. Nathan's magical senses told him that the flaming orbs weren't the simple explosives they appeared to be. Each contained a core of wizardry that would summon some kind of material to be blasted in all directions. But the spell was primarily mana-based, and quick tendrils of anti-magic detonated the fireballs early. Burning chunks of metal zipped all around the room, and Nathan pulled his aura in tight to break down the summoned material. He was pockmarked by burns, but the blindingly bright flames disintegrated in his aura, and he healed quickly. Nathan punched through the cloud of smoke to see that Badad had vacated the room, but he'd left one more surprise behind. It was a slowly moving orb of plasma surrounded by a framework of force magic. The force compressed down rhythmically, each pulse squashing the plasma down to a tiny point that flared with intense power and pushed the containment back out. The spell captured most of the energy, seemingly using it for the next round of compression. Nathan sprinted towards the spell and Badad's exit beyond. He formed a shield of anti-magic in front of him to block an explosion, preparing to destroy the spell as soon as he got into range. But then his gut clenched and he realized he wasn't running in quite the right direction. The room wobbled and flashes lit up his vision. It's an intermittent fusion reaction and is absorbing most of the energy to do it again. But I bet it's letting through the dangerous radiation, especially neutrons. I've probably absorbed 1,000 times the lethal dosage. Wizard's Meditation 6 achieved. Nathan's whole body started failing as high-energy neutrons bombarded his body, cascading into showers of radiation in the soft tissue. Nathan's vision started graying out, and he spent focus to keep himself conscious. He lanced out with anti-magic to slice through the bottom of the force magic right as the quester's spell compressed down once again. The resulting jet of fusing plasma roared through the chamber like the plume of a rocket, flames cascading over the broken remains of the giant's skull and punching into the academy below. The chamber became an oven filled with fire, but Nathan had dealt with magical flame before. He paused as his body was rebuilt. The world snapped back into focus, and Nathan purged his body of the newly created radioisotopes. He couldn't break them down, but he collected them in the colon for later elimination. Immortal Body 3 achieved. He's trying out different ways to kill me and seeing what sticks. Nathan didn't feel any traps ahead, but he still punched through the wall next to where Badad had disappeared, not trusting the gaping hole the quester had left behind. He found a golem that had been slashed into 3 pieces, and another in the wall a dozen paces down the corridor. He could feel a powerful source of wizardry farther ahead, at the very edge of his sensory range. That's gotta be him. Let's go through the floors to surprise him. I just need to get close once. Nathan tunneled downwards, then ran through an empty classroom. It felt like Badad was floating high in the air in the room above, and Nathan dug upwards directly underneath the quester. High-tier noticeability 10 achieved. He broke through without a sound, looking up to see a massive hall with rows of pillars supporting a high ceiling. Badad was floating 100 feet in the air, staring straight down at Nathan. His head was surrounded by a halo of divination magic, and the man's eyes literally glowed with fury. His lips curled up in a vicious smirk. There you are, Master of Stone. The material of the academy flowed towards Nathan. He tried to leap upwards for Badad, but the stone coiled around his ankles and yanked him downwards even as it dissolved in his aura. In less than a second the rock had completely encased him and begun pressing in from every direction. Nathan curled into a ball and flared his rage high to enhance his durability. He could feel the wizardry of the spell that was guiding the rock, and he could try to reach out and disrupt it. But holding his aura in close was all that was preventing him from being crushed to paste. So Nathan concentrated the anti-magic down to destroy the rock pushing against him and lessen the pressure. High-tier aura manipulation 3 achieved. The stone kept coming, a crushing force that stressed his body and his anti-magic. Bones groaned in protest, but Nathan focused on the wizardry in the marble. He needed to eke out every bit of efficiency he could in dissolving the enormous mass of stone that the quester was using to squash him. It didn't need to be a targeted effect. He just needed the mass of stone gone. Marble breaks down with acid. That isn't helpful, but it is crystalline. I have experience breaking down magical crystals by disrupting their lattice structures, like that book that came out of the river. I just need to apply that knowledge here. Arcane Nullfield 5 achieved. The stone started disintegrating nearly as quickly as it flowed towards him, and Nathan chuckled despite himself. He was destroying an enormous amount of rock. There was going to be a giant hole in the academy when he was done, and with the source of the academy's wizardry gone, it wasn't coming back. His new understanding let Nathan carve out a hollow in the onrushing stone, and he moved towards Badud's last known location. His senses told him that the quester was now floating off to the side, barely 30 feet away. Wizard's Detection 4 achieved. Nathan had a bit of aura to spare and swept it towards Badud, hoping to disrupt his flight spells. But the quester sensed the oncoming danger and teleported a short distance to escape. That broke his control over the stone, and Nathan erupted from the stone tomb to find himself in a much-changed room. The floors and pillars on all sides had been cannibalized to feed the rock encasement. What was left looked positively fragile. Badud's entire body was tense as they faced off in the ruined hall, eyes darting from side to side before fastening onto Nathan once more. He was just barely out of range of Nathan's anti-magic, and they were both ready to react to any move the other made. Nathan lashed out with his aura, but not towards Badud. He targeted the remaining support columns of the room, hoping to distract the quester with a collapsing ceiling. He would be fine, but if the quester had to dodge the falling stone, he might get within Nathan's range. The reaction was more than Nathan had expected. The support columns gave way and the entire ceiling came down, thousands of pounds of stone falling straight towards them both. There weren't a lot of places to run. Nathan launched himself upwards, preparing to make himself a hole in the falling rock and angle towards his enemy. But Badud's reaction was fast and overwhelming. Pressure wave. The spell was mostly air mana, with only hints of wizardry. It created an explosion so violent that the falling stone was blasted away in all directions. Nathan resisted the spell easily, and he and Badud were left floating in an empty void for a moment. Then more rocks started to fall, now illuminated by the golden haze that surrounded the academy. Badud's spell had blown off the roof, opening the room to the night air. A third of the base of the central tower had been obliterated, and the thick spire of rock looked a bit precarious overhead. More rocks started falling, and Nathan dashed towards Badud once again. But this time the quester had space to move, and he used wizardry to distort the air in the direction he wanted to go. He zipped upwards between the towers, volleying spells with impunity and leaving traps behind if Nathan tried to follow. It was like the game he'd played with Brox, except Nathan wasn't nearly as fast as the fallen quester. He sped after Badud regardless, dodging what spells he could and punching through the rest. He detonated the traps with precise spikes of anti-magic, and more stone crumbled as Badud's missed spells impacted the academy below them. But Nathan wasn't catching up, and Badud was holding the distance behind them constant as he slowly kited Nathan upwards. Acceleration 6 achieved. Then an arrow the size of a sapling bounced off Badud's mage armor, making him stagger. The quester whirled around to see more of the large projectiles headed his way. They were being fired by the archer golems spaced around the outside of the central tower. Nathan dodged as a few of the giant arrows flew at him. The projectiles weren't enchanted, but each was a 10-foot rod of metal moving so fast he could barely track them. The material was made out of wizardry, but they punched through his aura so quickly that it was nearly useless as a shield. Badud took advantage of the distraction to cast some kind of invisibility spell. His shape wavered, becoming vague and see-through to Nathan's eyes. The quester paused and started charging a new spell, feeding power into a dark sphere of energy. The golems apparently couldn't see through Badad's stealth magic. Their arrow fire refocused towards the only visible target, and Nathan was hard-pressed to dodge the dozens of projectiles while making any progress towards the stationary quester. Parkour 6 achieved. Then Badad unleashed the spell he'd been building. The orb of pure darkness had grown to a couple of feet across, and the light around it lensed strangely. Gravity pulled strongly towards the object, and the next few arrows were yanked off course. One of them flew straight into the dark sphere, entering without a ripple and vanishing entirely. Air whipped into the spell, causing it to grow at a steady pace. Is that a black hole? Not a real one. A black hole that big would weigh as much as Saturn and would eat everything in sight faster than thought. It's a wizardry spell that mimics a black hole, made with an insight of black holes. How much do the questers know? Nathan easily resisted the pull, trying to figure out the quester's new magic. It would suck in everything around it, including both matter and mana. However, the wizardry holding the spell was inherently unstable, and it would explode after a few minutes or when it absorbed too much. Everything the magical singularity consumed would contribute to the size of the explosion. Wizard's Understanding 4 achieved. The wizardry-powered black hole arced towards Nathan, and more of the giant arrows vanished inside, each causing the spell to expand with a slight jerk. Badad was obviously hoping that Nathan would break the spell and eat the explosion. I've got a better idea. A two birds with one stone kind of idea. Nathan stood in place on thin air as the sphere of darkness flew towards him. It was about 10 feet across now, and was absorbing or knocking off course all of the arrows fired his way. He reached out with his aura, careful not to interfere with the unstable magic holding the spell together. He did nudge it, so it would miss him slightly. He took a deep breath, focusing his mind and bracing his body. Then he bore down with focus and antimagic, seizing the trajectory of the magical black hole and forcing it to orbit around him, throwing it back in the general direction of the quester. Gale force winds tore at Nathan as the edge of the event horizon brushed his arm, wrenching at the limb. But he'd braced well, and he didn't get pulled into the spell. Airwalking 7 achieved. High-tier aura manipulation 4 achieved. Badad had been summoning forth shimmering obsidian spears and preparing to hurl them at Nathan, but he squawked when he saw his own spell headed in his direction. He fired off his summoned projectiles early, and the black hole happily ate the huge shards of volcanic glass. The quester cast Blink, teleporting out of the path of the devouring sphere. But Nathan hadn't been aiming at the quester. The miniature black hole zipped towards the central tower, falling downwards as Davrar's gravity asserted itself. The spell went straight through the roof of the academy about 15 feet short of the main spire. Nathan could see the spell grow rapidly as the magic consumed the mass and magic of the academy. I missed. What can I say? I haven't had a lot of practice throwing black holes. At least I had a nice backstop. A second later there was a tremendous explosion as Badad's wizardry destabilized. The entire bottom of the central tower turned to flying debris along with about a third of the roof of the academy. Thousands of chunks of stone zipped upwards, and Nathan dodged the big pieces and used his antimagic to disintegrate the smaller ones. Effortless dodge 7 achieved. Once most of the debris had passed, Nathan looked up to Badad, smirking and yelling through the cacophony of crashing stone. Nice spell, idiot. Mid-tier battle cry 8 achieved. The quester heard him, and his response was almost incoherently angry. Die in a pile of slag. Badad had cast a multi-layered force shield to protect himself, and about half the layers had shattered from the high-velocity stone shrapnel. He reached into a pouch, pulling out a single arrow made of glorious red light and pointing it down at Nathan. He spoke a spell, and the spell was repeated back by Davrar itself. The last arrows of Alida, the object in Badad's hands, burst with sudden power, duplicating itself dozens of times over as the quester released the divine artifact. His voice boomed down from above, enhanced enough to count as another attack. "You have brought doom to this continent, Nathan Lark. Now you die, judged by what remains of the god of fellowship in war. Well, I've survived scary magic before. Time to find out if I can survive this one." The arrows kept replicating until the sky was a mass of sharpened red flames. They didn't all point in Nathan's direction, but there were tens of thousands of them, radiating out from where Badad had activated the artifact. Nathan could barely sense Badad anymore, just the array of powerful divine magic above him. He wouldn't be able to get out from underneath the umbrella of magic, so Nathan accelerated up at the spell instead. He threw his anti-magic ahead, trying to punch a hole in the divine spell that had covered the sky. But this wasn't a normal spell, or even wizardry-summoned power. This was divine magic of the highest order, emotion and power made real by the direct authority of a dead god. Nathan dove into the magic regardless, attempting to peel away the layers of prideful energy. Each arrow was a spell with destructive power on par with a wizardry-empowered disintegration spell, and they were harder to block. Wizard's Meditation 7 achieved. The magic finished assembling, and every arrow flourished as one, conveying the sense of an honorable warrior saluting before a duel. Then the arrows flew downwards like fléchettes fired from a cannon the size of a mountain. Nathan flipped in midair at the last moment before impact, presenting his feet to the onslaught of sharpened holy fire. His anti-magic was blunting the divine magic, but it was a sandcastle trying to hold back the tide. Each arrow was backed by the authority of a god, and this spell had been built to tear through every defense, even that of another god. "I've got stamina to spare, but my focus is marginal. I just need to hold myself together." The first arrows blasted through his feet, vaporizing flesh and bone. Nathan's flesh was inherently anti-magic, and the divine magic spent itself destroying his legs. But there were more arrows right behind the first. 3 more tore into Nathan's body and detonated in suppressed flashes of holy fury, blowing out his lower torso. 2 more were right behind, and he clamped down on them with his aura at full strength, trying to prevent them from reaching his head. High-tier aura manipulation 5 achieved. He couldn't feel anything below his neck. The cloud of divine arrows was mostly below him now, shooting down towards the academy. Arcane Nullfield 6 achieved. "Ha! I survived your best shot." One final arrow hit Nathan in the back of the head, and he lost track of things. Everything became darkness, and his focus dimmed as it held the path open. In desperation, Nathan retreated into his mind palace, sheltering himself in the Davra-provided mental construct and keeping the barest crack open to the real world. "Congratulations! You have developed the mental fortress, utility skill into mental vault." Utility skill. Mental vault. This skill fortifies your mind, increasing the efficiency of focus spent to enhance your thoughts. It will protect you from skills and spells that interfere with your mind, helping you quickly store and recall memories. With time and effort, you can recall older memories and store them in the mental construct. Nathan opened his eyes again, very aware that his body was still regenerating everything below the shoulders. He fell through the air, looking up at a tower crumbling directly towards him. It wasn't the central tower, but looked like one of the Archmage towers he'd visited earlier. The sun appeared in the sky as daybreak came, blinding Nathan briefly. He struggled to slow himself down while getting out of the path of the mass of rock. It was difficult to do with half-regenerated arms, and he barely managed to avoid getting clipped by the tower as it landed on the main building below. Immortal Body 4 achieved. The motion spun Nathan around to see the Ascendant Academy lit by the new day. The divine magic of Badad's spell had riddled the abused stone with thousands and thousands of holes. Flashes of reddish light erupted from gaps in the structure as the arrows detonated inside. More towers fell, and plumes of dust and smoke billowed high into the air. Nathan stabilized himself, looking around for the quester. The lack of landmarks made it hard to place himself in relation to where he'd been before the apocalyptic spell, and he couldn't see Badud. He was pretty sure he'd fallen a couple of 100 feet at least. Did he teleport out? The defensive shell of the academy failed with a thunderous crash, sending a pressure wave in all directions that blew out Nathan's eardrums. The pressure shattered the outer walls of the academy and knocked over the last upright tower. It also stirred up the dust into a thick cloud that heavily obscured visibility, plunging the area into darkness once more. The last traces of the decorative magic of the academy imbued the cloud with random flashes of shimmering light. Nathan heard a faint ringing for a second before his eardrums healed. He reached out with his magical senses, scanning for any trace of Badud. There was a quick flare of air magic high above as a spell cleared some dust from the sky. Wizard's Detection 5 achieved. A smile crept across his face, and Nathan started ascending higher. He rocketed upwards, pushing himself to reach the quester before he could escape. Detection and messaging spells swept across the ruin below, and Nathan was careful to leave the magic alone. I think he's trying to decide if there's anything worth saving inside the academy. The quester started sweeping wedges of the sky clear of dust. He was trying to give himself a clear view of the carnage below. Nathan dashed to the side, getting out from directly underneath the quester and the path of his sky-clearing spells. He stayed where the dust was thickest and kept ascending, straining himself to match Badud's altitude as quickly as possible. Acceleration 7 achieved. When he got to the right height, he curved towards Badud, arrowing straight towards him from the side. Nathan flared noticeability to hide himself, noticing that the mental vault upgrade also enhanced the efficiency of that skill. He ran noiselessly through the thinning cloud of dust, absorbing any light mana that hit him and doing everything in his power to be a shadow in the swirling cloud. His target was studying the academy, not paying attention to the clouds of dust on all sides. Congratulations! You have developed the high-tier noticeability utility skill into visibility control. Utility skill, visibility control. You know when you are visible to others, and you can spend focus to become less visible or to direct their attention in certain directions. With his magical senses, Nathan could tell that the quester had set up a shield. It was Slow Shell, the same spatially expanded sphere that had blocked Nathan after Brox's death. But this time, he had new tools to understand and counter the wizardry. Nathan held off until the last second, then speared forward with 6 tendrils of anti-magic to neutralize the spell right before he made contact. Wizard's Understanding 5 achieved. Badud had been inspecting the wrecked academy with a frown. He reacted quickly when Nathan shattered his defensive spell, whipping sideways and casting a spell on instinct. Blind Nathan's anti-magic tore through the quester's building spell. His aura fought with Badud's wizardry-enhanced mage armor, but the defensive magic failed just in time for a fist to take the man in the gut with every ounce of Nathan's momentum behind it. Badud had some kind of non-magical bodily enhancement that meant the blow didn't rip through his gut and out of his back. But the quester still folded around Nathan's fist like wet cardboard, and the force of the blow was significant enough to send the black-robed mage flying backwards. Nathan followed, refusing to give Badud any space whatsoever. He grabbed onto the mage's wrists, pulling him close and wrapping the quester tightly in anti-magic. They glared at each other for a frozen second before Nathan yanked on Badud's arms to deliver a vicious headbutt. The quester's nose snapped with a pop against Nathan's forehead. He coughed, but then started laughing. It wasn't an amused laugh, but a vicious snicker. When Nathan looked up, Badad's teeth were bared in a bloody snarl. "So, you have bested me, boy. The heart of Giant's Rest is dead, and now you have slain its founder. Enjoy your prophesied victory, for it shall not last. You join the games of questers as the lowliest pawn." Badad continued, his eyes burning with vindictive flame. "Kill me, and you will be free of us for a time. But I will propose that the ending of history starts on this continent early, and bargain what I must to make it so. Saria will take some manner of deal, and all that will be left to you is smoke and blood." He laughed again, this time with pleasure as he gazed upon a scene from his imagination. 100 years, 150, and then all of the horrors of history will awake and scour the land clean. Have you even delved into the depths, looked for the hidden fortresses in the sky? I anticipate watching joyfully on the day Gemor drowns in ancient magics and monsters beyond imagination. Badad shook his wrist slightly in Nathan's grip. It wasn't so much an attempt to escape as an acknowledgement of the hold Nathan had on him. "Now kill me, that I may respawn and face the heckles of my grid for falling to a mere creation of Davrar." Nathan didn't let the speech bother him, and he smirked back at Badad. "Not quite yet." He finished drilling into the quester's annoyingly tough mana pool and began draining it for all it was worth. "Questers can travel long distances without teleport, so I won't be able to take him prisoner." The man gaped like a beached fish. What are you doing? It sounds like killing him is only a minor setback and I can't capture him. Maybe if I break his magic, that will hold through the respawn." Nathan shrugged. "The least I can do is leave you something to remember me by." Badad started struggling, jerking and bucking to try to get free of Nathan's grip. He was strong, with more strength than a mage should have. But Nathan in the grip of his rage was stronger, and he held the quester still as he drained his mana pool. But there was a problem. Badad was a wizard with an enormous mana pool and a connection to magic that resembled a steel cable instead of a thread. Nathan couldn't sever it. He couldn't cut the quester off from magic. Not yet. He could fuck it up a bit. He snarled in Badad's face, stretching his anti-magic to damage what he could, mangling every piece of metaphysical architecture he could reach. He didn't know what all of it did, but he knew it would make the man a worse spellcaster. He ripped and tore, stretching his anti-magic to the breaking point to wreck the magical foundation Badad must have spent centuries or millennia building. High-tier aura manipulation 6 achieved. Wizard's understanding 6 achieved. The quester's mouth was open in a silent scream, and tears mixed with the blood trickling from his nose. He coughed up more blood before speaking once more. "I'll see you dead in a pit of Quenfi I'll hire mercenaries from." Nathan cut him off with another headbutt and growled at his enemy. "I don't think you understand. If you unleash endings on Gemor, then that means I can't solve the problem by staying here. I'm coming for you, asshole. If you can control the endings, then you can stop them." He pulled Badad down into a knee which broke his jaw, then repeated the blow. He flailed the quester back and forth to strike his throat, face, and temples without ever letting go of his wrists. It took a couple of solid minutes of beating the overly tough body, but eventually Nathan had done enough damage that he could tell the man was dying. Nathan crushed an automatic healing enchantment and regarded the pulped face. "If I join the game of questers, then I do it as a player." Badad died. His body dissolved into light, leaving Nathan alone, high above a ruined city. Void of Magic has leveled to 511. You have destroyed the Ascendant Academy and killed the quester Badad. Spellslayer has leveled to 372. You have slain the quester Badad from stealth and destroyed the institution of the Ascendant Academy. Well, shit. 173 levels for Void of Magic, 112 for Spellslayer. Because Void of Magic wasn't leveling during all the murders. Congratulations, you have killed a quester. They will not be able to return to this continent until those who knew them should have died of old age. If you claim this kill to other questers, they will receive verification. Be cautious, for many questers are friends and allies of each other. Another rumble of collapsing stone sounded from below, and Nathan looked down as the Ascendant Academy finished collapsing in on itself. Mission accomplished. The fall of a giant Yellen ran for her life, recasting mage armor, but she knew it wouldn't save her from the golems. The stone statues had been the guardians of the academy, but now they were trying to kill everybody. They should have stayed in the suite. They would have been safe there, at least for a little while. But Yellen had wanted to get Susa out of the academy during the night, so she wouldn't be executed as an escaped slave. She hadn't given the woman a second thought until tonight. But after listening to her story, Yellen wanted to protect her. Ronnie and Hibber hadn't been so sure, but Yellen convinced them. It hadn't been hard. She'd been working on shaping them into loyal companions for years. Her father always told her that a powerful mage needed people whose allegiance was beyond question. At first it had seemed their escape had been blessed by the giant. She'd been expecting a patrol to grab them, and she was ready to use the excuse of a message from her brother to get past. But instead, they found what was left of a patrol. 5 mages dismembered by giant hands. The golems had only left behind bloody footprints that led away from the scene of carnage. The doors had also stopped working, but the wall to the staircase had already been blown open by somebody else looking to escape. At ground level, they'd found a battle between a dozen mages and half that many golems. Ronnie had wanted to stay and help, the monocursed idiot. Her first cast of mage armor had been broken by a ricochet from a thrown rock or maybe a spell. She wasn't sure. Yellen took a deep breath, refocusing herself on the present. Her mind turned endlessly, trying to pull meaning out of what she knew. What did Nathad do? He broke the academy, and now the golems are killing everybody. Did he kill the founder? Did he kill Badud? She was distracting herself from what mattered, which was running. They were almost out. Almost into the city. They could be safe there, get to her family and wait until everything calmed down. The academy quaked around them, the walls jerking violently and throwing everybody off of their feet. There was a tremendous explosion that was muffled by the bulk of the academy, but cracks still ran down the hallway and stone decorations fell from the ceiling. A head-sized chunk of rock bounced off Yellen's mage armor, and she pushed Susa aside just before a second stone landed on her unprotected head. Hibber had managed to catch himself against the wall and helped them both up. They ran with increased urgency, breaking into the entrance hall. Giant's blood. I forgot about the security golems. Yellen froze in place, looking around. But the pedestals that should have held the academy's first line of defense were empty. At the end of the hall, the grand doors leading out of the academy stood wide. It looked like they'd been smashed open from the inside. The 4 of them moved cautiously across the vast expanse of open floor, avoiding the interview booth and the magical testing area. She could smell blood. They were halfway across the room when dozens of streaks of blinding red light burned through the huge room from top to bottom, each of them shining in her mana sense with pride and anger. Yellen blinked against the afterimages. She looked around to see Ronnie disintegrating into ash beside her, the floor where he'd been standing marked with a blackened hole. Then there was a faint explosion below, and red light vomited from the hole before it blew out in a fountain of shattered stone. Yellen raised an arm to protect herself, but the mage armor took most of the attack. She was only scratched by a few smaller shards of rock that managed to penetrate. Hibber stopped to stare at the place where his best friend had been standing a moment ago, his mouth open in shock. They were all blown off their feet by another explosion, as an echoing wave of sound and pressure rolled through the chamber from the open door. It broke Yellen's mage armor and her ears spiked in pain. She screamed but couldn't hear herself. Looking up, she saw new cracks on the wall around the door. More stones fell. If they didn't move, they were going to be trapped. Gritting her teeth, Yellen pushed herself up, then grabbed Hibber and hauled him to his feet. She screamed in his face, though she couldn't hear her own words. "Come on. We need to get out before we join the giant in his grave." Together they grabbed Susa and stumbled out of the academy as a corner of the entrance hall collapsed. Beyond was a scene of further devastation, with flattened buildings and bodies scattered around the streets. Magic flashed from fighting in the distance, and Yellen hesitated before pointing in a direction that looked safer. They needed to get away from the academy before the entire thing collapsed. Giant's Rest is chaos. We need to get to Housemint and hope they let us in. Feline trudged away from Giant's Rest in the disguise of a farm worker. The lockdown had been lifted the previous day, but she had waited an extra day beyond that to leave. Interrogating the first to leave after a lockdown was an old nail trick, and she wasn't going to take any risks with so much chaos. Not without Nathan to kill their magic. The assassin sighed and looked back at the lights of Giant's Rest. She'd left the city near midnight, and it had taken most of the night to move through the crops in stealth. She could have moved much faster with Nathan's ability to block detection magic. Grimacing, she turned back to the mountains and kept walking. Nathan's talents had been the opportunity she'd been waiting for. The chance to finally stop skulking around Giant's Rest, gathering information and making the rare kill under perfect circumstances. Together, they'd been able to kill and escape detection over and over again. It had made her greedy. She had gotten impatient, especially when the founder had summoned the mages to counter the discord she had built. Feline had wanted to bring everything to a close and had thought Nathan would understand the importance of their target. But she hadn't understood how deeply his stubborn righteousness went, and hadn't managed to shadow Kia's light quickly enough. At least now she wouldn't suffer as Nathan charged into a dungeon for fools. I wonder if he's dead yet. It was obvious that her most recent apprentice had managed to get inside the academy. The gossip of suspicious deaths told her that he'd avoided immediate detection and made some kills, but he wasn't going to achieve the fall of the academy. Nathan could fight mages, but he wasn't a true assassin. He was predictable and foolish, and she expected him to kill a few dozen mages inside the academy before the quester found him. At least an assassin in the academy would shake Giant's Rest. She'd been worried they would retaliate against Gemor and Housemint, but it seemed like Nathan's deeds only made them more aware of their vulnerability. The mages in the street were calling for defense and consolidation, not retaliation. Her attention moved to the future. Nathan had proven that anti-magic was the key to the academy. Her top priority was getting back to Housemint and scooping up an anti-mage as her next apprentice. The only question was, which one? Her bones said the siblings weren't a good choice. They relied on each other too much, and two were harder to shape than one. Raph would be easier to influence. He was an angry young man, and Feline knew exactly how to mold him into a great assassin. With his anti-magic, he would be a terror to Giant's Rest. But Shai, the young woman, reminded Feline of herself. There was a blasphemous opportunity there, a chance to train a peer, not just a tool. If Shai dedicated herself to the destruction of Giant's Rest, then Feline would be glad to help her claim power. With anti-magic, she can be what Nathan should have been. Her bard skills twinged, causing Feline to turn in surprise. She wasn't a prophet, but her bard skills had developed to let her sense pivotal moments, the times when the threads of fate drew tight before unwinding to reveal a new course. Something important was happening back in Giant's Rest. Is Nathan dying? I hope he takes many of the senior lecturers with him. That would damage Giant's Rest for years. She watched the academy with a frown. The glowing haze that illuminated the building and the city around it was the same as ever. But the glowing decorations of the academy itself were wrong. They flashed brightly, a siren instead of a light show. She'd seen the academy hundreds of times, and it had never looked like this. Feline stared at the hated edifice, trying to understand what this meant. She spent a few minutes looking for any other signs before a faint cloud of dust puffed out near the base of the tallest tower. It was impossible to see people from this distance, but she squinted for them anyway. Then something detonated inside the academy itself, and the central tower jumped upwards before collapsing down into the huge building. Phaline's mouth dropped open, and she started running back towards Giant's Rest. This was an opportunity she would not miss. She halted a minute later when the sky lit with red fire. A cloud of magic manifested itself over the academy, and the spell felt deadly even from this distance. She could feel strong emotions emanating from the magic, like an honorable warrior saluting a foe before a duel. Ending's damned divine magic. The cloud dropped a second later, zipping downwards like a falling hammer. The spell went through the academy, and every one of the upper towers fell with it. The sun lit at that very moment, shining balefully down on the academy before the entire structure started to collapse. A shockwave visibly rocked the structure, sending dust swirling in every direction and crushing the few lower towers that still stood. The blast propagated outwards, crushing the buildings close to the academy and tearing off roofs across the city. It ripped leaves from the orchards and flattened crops in a huge radius even outside of the city walls. Phaline stood there and let the rush of air knock her over. She was stunned, and it had nothing to do with the explosion. The assassin lay on the ground and stared up at the sky, attempting to process what had just happened. Then she rolled lithely to her feet to watch what was left of the Ascendant Academy collapse under its own weight. It took a few minutes, and Phaline watched as her long-delayed vengeance arrived. Only when the last piece of stonework fell into a cloud of dust did she shake herself and start sprinting back towards the city. I need to get back inside before anybody closes the gates. There will be smoke and blood inside the city, and I'm going to redden my blades with anybody who tries to stabilize it. My vengeance is available. I need only take it. A few seconds later, she had another thought. He did it. He toppled the academy. I wonder if he survived the deed. The heirs stood atop a mountaintop, giving Sarah the prime vantage point to pick off the last of the undead. She was hunched over her rifle, occasionally firing a shot down into the darkened valley below. So that's a monastery of Quaz. I wanted to fight a grave tangle, Stella said grumpily. Arl yawned from where he was sitting on the peak. He'd stopped trying to clean crusted gore off his armor, and the look he shot Stella was less than amused. Kachai would have killed it first. Your new spells are Dragon's Breath, but his magic is the bane of the undead. He gestured towards where the wolfman stood, surrounded by a nimbus of divine light. The newly christened Shield of Hope nodded back, a small smile playing along his canine lips. Indeed, I begin to see the same light Nathan does when he dismantles enemy spellwork with his aura. The glow around him shifted and moved like he was flexing a muscle. Though I am limited to destroying only the most vile of magics. Sarah fired another shot off into the night, and far below an undead abomination fell. The sniper scanned the valley one more time, then stood with a sigh. That's the last of the behemoths, but some smaller zombies may have escaped into the mountains. Should we do a sweep in the morning? Arl cocked his head upwards at the sky overhead. Might as well take a quick look. It's nearly morning. He glanced towards Stella. Want to try that fly again? Maybe this time without dumping me 100 feet onto the rocks. The red-haired mage groaned. You survived. Don't fart ice at me. Arl rapped his metal-clad chest with a knuckle. That wasn't your deed. My armor limited the pain to bruising, but I still needed healing. Stella stood up and pulled a scroll out of an inner pocket, unrolling it to study a well-worn schematic. Then she stepped forward and started to weave the new spell. I can't promise a prophecy of victory, but flight is worth being bold. She walked over to Arl to link the air and force magic to his limbs before integrating the whole spell with a basic mana construct that would let Arl guide his own flight. 15 minutes of intently focused work later, she stepped away. Done. The sun came out as if waiting for her word, and everybody blinked in the sudden light. Arl shrugged, shading his eyes as he looked upwards. My bones say there's a hidden cost here. His helmet deployed to cover his head, and he rose quickly into the sky, only to jerk as a rolling boom echoed across the mountains. The heirs looked around, trying to locate the source of the sound. Nothing stood out, but then Arl pointed from his higher viewpoint, rising higher into the sky and yelling down to them. It's the Ascendant Academy, he trailed off, watching whatever was happening beyond the mountains and out of sight of the rest of the heirs. After a few moments, Sarah got impatient and yelled up to him. Share the light in your eyes. What's going on? Arl dropped out of the sky, shaking his head as he landed gently on the mountaintop. It's the academy. It's gone. It looked like the entire building collapsed. Nathan, Stella said, a vicious grin on her face. Looks like he'll be coming back sooner than we expected, Katja replied, glowing even more brightly as his satisfaction spilled out into the world. Sarah harumphed and stood with a sigh. I bet Stalker Bones to Dragon's Teeth that he'll have more levels than all of us together now. We should go to him. Stella threw an arm around the taller woman. That's a wise path. He's going to go after the ending soon, and I won't be left behind. We're aiming for the same target, Arl said. I'll be free of regret as long as we can walk by his side. Saria Pamaris rushed to unlock her inner sanctum. Unfortunately, when the vault was built, she decided that security trumped convenience. That meant it took a minimum of 5 minutes to enter the ultra-secure area where she kept the most powerful instruments of her role. She spent that time cursing her own paranoia and recalling commissioning the security. She'd been in Arosa more than 2,000 years ago when she'd run into a vault she couldn't break into. Once the city plunged into chaos, Saria had made sure to track down the family of enchanters that had built it. Then she'd enticed them to move to Kahona and work for her. That had been lucky for them, since Erosa had fallen to the ending of fire shortly afterwards, while Kahona still stood strong. When they'd asked how many security measures she wanted for this vault, she'd answered, all of them. After all, it was a vault built to keep out questers, and that was like shielding against a supernova. But they'd taken her meaning. And now here she was, disabling dozens of security measures one at a time as she wondered what kind of message she'd gotten. Currently, the only piece of information she had was that she'd received a communication marked with the highest level of priority. That kind of message could only be sent by another quester, and it meant something important and time-sensitive. She tapped her fingers against the vault door impatiently as the foot-thick mithril finally rolled aside with ponderous weight. Saria bustled into the small room, walking around the wide copper basin that took up the center of the space, and heading to the enchanted screens that occupied a desk set against the wall. It was the nexus of her grid, the center of communication with other questers. If a hostile quester got access to it, they could learn the details of dozens of plots and schemes. Lights blinked at her from other devices that Saria used to communicate with her vassals and spies, but those weren't her focus. Mortals often thought their news was the highest of priorities, but it rarely qualified. Yes, the secret alliances of hostile countries was important, but not as important as information on the endings. There were a few messages from other questers, but the one that had summoned her was from Ushia Mur, the quester who delved farthest into prognostication. She was a priceless resource, even if she delighted in being cryptic. The message was simple: look in on Giant's Rest. Then check for messages from Badud. She frowned at the smiley face. It wasn't out of character for Ushia, but the orcish woman knew it would irk Saria. The seer had also left out any actual information, but the presence of the smiley face at least meant that the news was good, or at least funny. The slight woman sighed and spun around to activate the giant scrying bowl. It was a genuine artifact of Kali's, capable of showing any location on Davrar. The only way to block it was to hide somewhere the user of the bowl didn't know about. Once it had booted up, she gave it a target. Giant's Rest from 15,000 feet directly overhead. The bowl resolved into a crystal-clear image of the city in question, or rather, what was left of it. The center of the city was devastated, with buildings knocked over and clear evidence of battles through the streets. The academy itself was little more than a faintly glowing pile of rubble, and Saria gaped at the utter destruction of what had once been a stronghold of her enemies. She panned her viewpoint around to try to understand what had happened. There were giant golems in the streets, some broken by magic and others still rampaging. Mages fought them, and mages died, occasionally destroying one of the golems as they went. People fled the city, most headed towards the satellite cities of Giant's Rest. They lost control of the grave of all giants. How? Susu enchanted it and she's the best on Davrar. Badad is supposed to be there now, dealing with, what was it called? Gemor, that's right. Brox went to counter him, but then he lost. As usual. His report was strangely optimistic but didn't elaborate. I need to lecture him again on writing proper accounts. Saria grimaced again as she thought about Gemor. It was Brox's territory, but she'd long ago resigned it to be little more than a speed bump for the ambitions of Giant's Rest and the questers who controlled it. Brox covered a vast territory, but he didn't build for the future. If she or Ushia or Garna had invested the time, they could have driven Giant's Rest off the continent and established it as a stronghold. But it would have taken centuries of care and attention, and they all had other commitments. Though Ushia's been shaping Agman from a distance, to prevent Giant's Rest from dominating the continent so trivially. She said she was building a legionary army with strong mental protection skills. Saria didn't see Badad or any signs of his magic, and turned back to her communication tablet to get the rest of the story. As promised by Ushia, there was a series of messages from Badad. He wanted to start the ending of history and ban questers from the continent that Giant's Rest occupied. She shot a look towards the scrying mirror. Had occupied. With the academy gone and their capital devastated, they'd be gone in 50 years. Saria was dismissive of the request. With Brox dead, Badad must have lost to a mortal, and now he wanted to bring the ending several hundred years early to take revenge on whoever had beaten him. That wasn't what the endings were for. She wasn't about to let him use Davrar to unleash his frustration on the heroes that had managed to kill a quester without one of their own. She made some notes to send agents to find out who had pulled that off, and make them an offer. Then she saw Badad's latest message, with what he was offering in return. Complete cessation of his grid's activities across 3 continents of our choice, and a guarantee that he personally won't act against our interests for 1,500 years. Her eyebrows shot into her hairline. With minimal investment, they would be able to tilt the balance of power on 3 battlefields, establishing new centers of power or crushing those of their enemies. Badad was one of the most combat-capable questers around, with enough magical might to win duels and crush armies. This deal would reshape the strategic map, all in return for giving up one region with minimal investment. She almost rejected the offer outright, because it was too good to be true. Then she reconsidered. He's being emotional. Whatever happened in Giant's Rest made him so angry he's acting irrationally. We need to take this deal before he calms down and retracts it. Saria reached for the tablet again, drafting a message to ask Ushia if she was willing to abandon Agman. The Orcish Empire had been their true plan to check Giant's Rest, though the other quester had barely begun to guide their culture and traditions thus far. But the Orcish seer disliked changing plans once they'd been made. Before Saria had finished drafting her message, she received a note from the woman in question. Take the deal. It's worth it. Then follow your instincts. Saria blinked at the message. If Ushia was paying this much attention, that meant there was even more going on than she expected. She sent a quick acceptance to Badud, then checked which of her trusted agents was close to Litcliffe. She needed to get people into Gemor.